person next to them must speak very quietly until the people in the back feel awkward.
Quiet, please. Quiet. Thank you.
Can you guys hear? Okay. If you guys want to hear the talk,
Yes.
come forward. Oh my God, we're in the Matrix. That's cool. Okay, so I'll plug in my computer in a second. How many people is this your first time here? Oh my gosh, wow, so many people. How many people is this your second time here? That's a lot. How many is it your third time? Do we have any three-timers? Okay, lots. I can't really see anything, so fourth? Probably a few fourths. Okay, some fourths, that's cool. How many of you have been to Sweet Mouse? This is my first time here. It's cool, it's like we're in the Matrix. This is really cool. Sweet Mouse, Sugar Mouse. My bad. Okay, so we are going to get started here. And so if you don't follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Take out your phone, take a picture, follow us, tag us. If you tag us on Instagram or Twitter, that's helpful for us. We'll remind you later. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what is decentralized science. So how many people here come from like a science background? Oh, a lot. And medicine counts. You can raise your hand. No need for that. And then how many people how many people here because of SBC, like Stanford and blockchain? Oh, some? Okay. A lot? Okay. So decentralized science is like a combination of science and blockchain. So what does that mean? So decentralized, like DeFi was like using the blockchain for as a financial primitive to sort of remove some of the intermediaries from people, from like the middlemen that was slowing down the financial system. And decentralized science is sort of using that same idea, where, guys in the back, the decentralized science is like the same idea, where instead of like trying to remove, instead of using the blockchain for financial incentives, you can use the blockchain to simplify science. So imagine a world in which like the internet was a giant lab, and you didn't have to work in like a university setting in order to do science. And like you could do science on the blockchain. There was no one in charge. The best ideas came to the top. It was open source. It was collaborative. And so this is what decentralized science is. Instead of doing science in a university setting, you're doing science in like an internet native way. And there's a lot of really cool benefits to this that we'll talk about. And what's interesting is I don't think that this is too far from the future. Like we're just on the cusp right now of like a big transformation where universities are sort of losing some prestige, and sovereign and individuals are becoming more and more important. So I'm going to talk around like 5 different things that distinguish like traditional science, which we're going to call trad-sci, from decentralized science. So trad-sci, it relies on, the first one is funding. So trad-sci relies on like government grants to make it work. And the problem with this is that government grants oftentimes just fund the same projects over and over again. And that's okay, but it doesn't allow for new moonshot style ideas. Whereas in decentralized science, it's more of like a meritocracy, where people can fund things that matter to them. And instead of it just being the same things funded over and over again, new ideas can come, and sort of more aggressive ideas. The second one I want to talk about that differentiates traditional science from decentralized science is publishing. So existing publishing sort of relies on peer review, and everyone thinks of peer review as the gold standard in which there's nothing better than it. But if you actually have been on a peer review committee, or if you've submitted a paper for peer review, you know that it's not actually that great. So the people who review the project don't actually care a lot about it, and because they're not paid, and they're sort of just trying to get it done as quickly as possible. They have no skin in the game. And oftentimes no one looks carefully at the data. They just sort of know who's submitted what and approves their friends. in decentralized science, it's more like a prediction market for academic papers, where the people who could bet on papers that they think are going to be very successful. And if they're correct that that research is very important, they will get rewarded with money or tokens. Data sharing. So in order to participate in traditional science, the end result is oftentimes a PDF paper posted on archive. Now that's okay, but if anyone ever wants to sort of reproduce that experiment, it's very hard to do that because either the methodology is so complex or it's just they can't get access to the data. In decentralized science, all the data is posted on chain, so you can get access to that immediately. This is a big one, I think. So one of the things that decentralized finance did that sort of was really important compared to traditional finance was that it opened the financial system up to thousands and thousands of more people. And I think there's something similar that could happen in science, where there should be like 1,000 times more scientists than there are today. And the reason there aren't is because in traditional science, you need to apply to a university, you need to get accepted, you need to find a PI, you need to get funded, and all of these things are steps that are in the way of like people getting access to an institution. It artificially suppresses the number of sort of scientists that are out there. Sort of similar to like the AMA, how there's like that automatically sort of suppresses the number of doctors that are there. So I think with like decentralized science, you're going to try and open it up and make it permissionless so there could be 1,000 times more scientists. Another one is like IP, or I would also call it like putting together the incentives. So in a research lab, your incentive is to get a paper published, and then to use that to get an academic role. The problem with that, though, is like it would be much better to just tie the work to the actual underlying, tie the status that you get from the work to the underlying work, instead of having it go through all these intermediaries. So in a traditional university, if you create some sort of IP, you have to put that into the licensing office. You have to get access to it, and then by the time you're done with it, you actually don't get any sort of tangible benefit from it. With decentralized science, every research project is a pool of IP that people can contribute to and then earn based on whatever they contribute. Governance is DeFi allowed for new types of governance to happen. So any DAO that exists has like liquid democracy or futocracy, which are all very new styles of deciding which experiments should be conducted, how resources should be allocated. And in a traditional setting, it's just sort of the PI who might already have been a professor for 40 years and doesn't really care. They're calling the shots. So that governance model is sort of broken. And with decentralized science, it's a much more liquid, active, and dynamic way of doing it. Reproducibility is another one. So like in a traditional science setting, a lot of universities are coming under fire because their research is either fake or is not easy to reproduce. But when you put all of the data for a research project on chain, it's really easy to reproduce it because every piece of data has has provenance associated with it. So you can just click a button and an AI agent can go over it again. So, and then the last one is like AI. So I don't think there's going to be any like human scientists in the future. Like all science is going to be done by AI bots because they're faster and just like have much more knowledge. So. Is this going forward? Okay, whatever. So you need to start putting data on chain where these AI bots can automatically just get access to it. So I think the future of DeSci is really, really bright. I think the future of DeSci is really, really bright. We're going to democratize science, make it permissionless. There's going to be 1,000 times more people and scientists and bots involved, and it's going to be much, much more reproducible. Okay, so now I will talk a little about decentralized science in New York City, which is presumably why you're here. Here's some of the past speakers. We've had people doing mushrooms, psychedelics, bees, AI, Martin Shkreli, the guy who invented NFTs, the Research Hub guy. We're really into longevity. We had a professor from Albert Einstein come talk about tissue replacement. We had the guy who did the enhanced games, which is basically like the Olympics on steroids. We had someone who's doing focused ultrasound for the brain. We had someone who's doing bioelectricity. And we had a guy who was using a camera in your toilet to measure your poop. So we go for the weird speakers for sure. Okay, so those are the speakers. We get a lot of people out here. I started this group just because I wanted to create a space for people interested in science in New York City. I thought there was a lot of people playing like backgammon and stuff, but not a lot of people discussing interesting ideas. So I thought this would be like a good thing to do. We have a website where we put all our videos and all our recordings. So if you go to DeSci.NYC, we have all our videos. The video will be posted tomorrow morning. And we have a lot of cool upcoming events, which I'll share with you right now. Okay, so this is a big one. We got Brian Johnson, and he's going to, do you guys know who that is? Yeah! Okay, so August 19th, if you can scan that QR code in the bottom, I think maybe if we do that, maybe it'll be a little bit easier. So that'll be really cool. This is the guy that basically like, is at the forefront of longevity and trying to live forever, or trying to not die. He's also a really cool guy. I think he's pushing. I think he's making it seem possible that we might be able to live forever. And he's been thinking about. He's not just like a Johnny come lately. He's been thinking about these ideas for a really, really, really long time. I was reading some of his stuff from 2018. It was actually really cool. Next up, we have Jo Zahner, who will be coming on September 19th. She was one of the original people that was interested in biohacking and CRISPR. Very, very cool person. She's also been doing this for a very long time, like an OG of crypto. And she'll be here on September 19th. Okay. Next, we have Noor Siddiqui. Classmate. She's doing a very cool thing on embryology and trying to reduce the amount of birth defects by looking at the embryo after it's been fertilized and screening it for genetic diseases. It's a very cool project and it's working and it's live. So that'll be a great project. It's a great topic and she's very cool. Next we have Sheridan. He's going to be talking about penile optimizations. Yeah, okay. He's been researching this topic, and his whole premise was that he came up, he's like, I think we need to do a talk on this. He's a Teal Fellow, a founder, very cool guy, and he's been studying this. He thinks there's a lot of like bad research out there, and he'll be talking about what he's found. That's on November 11th. Okay, so those are the talks. Okay, next we have a project that we've been working on. Where's Brian? Brian, you want to come up here? Yeah, come up here. Yay, Brian! Thank you, Brian, for Brian is technical people in the door, but actually he's behind the scenes that actually like builds everything that we're doing here. So he's the tech wizard that builds like the project that we're both working on. It's called Science Validator Network, which I'll talk about in a second. And so what we've been working on today is a way to like, decentralizing science happens a lot on-chain, but it can also happen a lot off-chain. And we wanted to think about ways in which we could use this amazing community that we've built today to like deepen it a little bit. So we decided to launch like a crypto token for DeSciNYC that we built. So what does it do? We're trying to make it so that basically what will happen is like speakers for the next one will be voted on based on like a community vote instead of just like one or two people deciding who to invite. So we're trying to like decentralize it a little bit. You can vote on the next speaker. You'll be able, if like the Brian Johnson event's gonna fill up, we already have like 500 people RSVP'd. So like we're gonna have to cap it, so we're gonna try and limit it to people who've been here before. We have a community group chat, so we're going to token gate that based on people that have been to an event at least once, so there's some common ground in the community. And maybe we have this cool shirt we'll give away. Well, if you guys bring a sponsor in at some point, we will split the money in the DAO. So we're thinking of a lot of cool ways to actually like make this community into like a decentralized on-chain community. Can I say anything? No. Okay. Yay, Brian! Okay, so if you want to get the tokens for the if you want to get DeSciNYC tokens, you can scan this. We'll also send an email in a little bit so that you can claim your DeSciNYC tokens. I'll leave it there. Oh, also, I'll take this opportunity. If anyone wants to sponsor these events, feel free to send me a message. I think this is at this next page. Oh, we're going to have a leaderboard for DeSciNYC as well, which is going to be cool, so you can see who are like the top DeSciNYCers. Oh, go back. Sorry. Did everyone get it? Okay. Yay. Oh, and if you're a speaker, you get DeSciNYC tokens too. So, double. So we have a leaderboard. Oh, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Tag us. On DeSciNYC on Twitter and on Instagram. Tag. Also tag Sweet Mouse, and thank you for giving us this space. And also tag Williamsburg Pizza. Is Williamsburg Pizza guy here? Is he here? He was gonna come? I don't know. Okay. Tag Williamsburg Pizza, they gave us the pizza. This is my contact info. If anyone here is interested in sponsoring one of the upcoming events, you can email me mfisher1000@gmail. We've had a couple of people interested in sponsoring the Brian Johnson or the Penile Health one. So there are real costs associated with doing this event, and it basically comes out of my pocket. So if you're interested in donating to sponsor another event, feel free to email me. Okay, quickly, this event is also sponsored by Science Validator Network. It's the Science Validator Network is a new way of like collecting scientific data for this AI-driven scientific future. Science is only going to get us so far. AI is going to take us to the next level. We need better data sets. Currently the problem with data today is it's all scraped from Reddit, and the Reddit data is oftentimes very bad. So we're going to try and create a very precise data set with very high quality data. And every person that contributes to it is incentivized for their contribution with a crypto token. There's a validator network that we've created that uses AI and prompts to validate the accuracy of the data. This is a different way of doing science. It's not sort of a causal thing where you have a hypothesis, an experiment, results, and a conclusion. This is sort of based on accurate modeling of the world and letting the AI come up with new ways of doing it. Partially we're doing this, we're hiring. If anyone is interested in working together with us on this project and also hosting some of these events, or mostly it's on the Science Validator Network, we're hiring. We're backed by the top VCs in crypto, including Polychain, Delphi, Balaji, and Blizzard. And that's all. Okay. Anyone have any questions? Questions? One question, two question? One question? Okay. One question, come on. Yes, go ahead. Oh, Rebecca's also here. She's not here today, but she's in charge of our social media. Anyone else? Okay. All right. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome David Shor on stage. So I'll give David a brief introduction. I met David in New York City, and he was doing some really, really interesting stuff at the intersection of politics and science and polling, which he'll talk about. And he worked with Obama's re-election campaign. They called him the Nate Silvers of Obama's personal Nate Silvers. And I'll let him take it away. So let's give him a warm round of applause.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to spend tonight mostly talking about politics. So hopefully that's okay. So first, all right. It looks like everything on the screen works. The mic is basically working. Good stuff. So first, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my company. I am the co-founder of a shop called Blue Rose Research. We're about 45 people. We work with basically every progressive group that you might have heard of, or more accurately, maybe like 70% of the progressive groups that you might have heard of. Our main thing is that we spend most of our time basically doing testing. I'm going to talk more about this in the presentation, but really up until very recently, nobody knew what actually worked in politics and what didn't work. And machine learning and statistics is helping us finally shed light on that. So the first thing, and I just want to make sure people can see the screen, but the first thing is that when you are working on a political campaign, there are really only two questions that matter. First is, are you persuading voters, and are you mobilizing voters? Mobilizing voters, complex topic. Honestly, I'm not going to talk that much about it tonight, but persuasion, I'm going to try to go into some depth on. So the big problem in politics, probably the fundamental problem in politics, is that if somebody sees an ad or hears a speech and changes their mind, we have no way to know that because there are no tracking pixels in people's brains. So what that means is that the signal that you truly care about is invisible to you, but there are a bunch of other signals out there. There's, who clicks, what's the click-through rate on your emails or your ads, how many views did your thing on YouTube get? And the problem is that the only people who engage with democratic political content are highly engaged, educated, largely white liberals. And if you choose what to tell swing voters on the basis of what excites liberals, you're going to have a bad time. This is a perfect example of this. So, I'm going to just start. This was Hillary Clinton's Mirrors ad. She put, it won a bunch of awards. She put about $8 million behind it, in the week before the election. And, the basic idea behind it is that there are a bunch of little girls, and they're looking in the mirror, and then they see across the mirror, instead of themselves, Donald Trump saying bad things, racist things, sexist things, makes fun of disabled people at some point. And then, one of the women at the end, she cries. It's very powerful, I guess. And people really people like me really liked it. The problem is that when we actually did a randomized control trial where some people saw it and some people didn't, and then we saw how they voted after, it turned out that it made people more likely to vote for Republicans. Which is bad, at least from my perspective. I'm sure there are some Republicans in the room, but this is not a rare thing. We actually find across all of the tests we've done that roughly 1 in 5 pieces of content that Democrats make with the intent of persuading people to vote for Democrats actually makes people more likely to vote for Republicans. And so, my personal theory of change, which is I spend most of my time doing, is let's identify those pieces of content and not show them to people. Simple. And so just to kind of go through, this is a diagram of how what we do works. The basic idea is people go into a survey, we ask a bunch of questions, and then there's a control group that does not see an ad, and then a treatment group that does see an ad. And then afterward, you can compare, you can ask them who they're voting for, and if the control group is 50% Harris, and the treatment group is 52% Harris, then you can causally say that the ad changed their chance of voting for you by 2%. And so that's the basic mode of analysis. It's easier said than done, it turns out, but that is the idea. And so, this method of analyzing things in the corporate space, people call it brand lift. In politics, nobody did this until about 4 or 5 years ago. In 2016, it cost, and I remember, when I worked in 2012, a campaign person, I was in analytics, we were in a thing called The Cave, they locked all the nerds in a closet, basically. And so, when a campaign leadership person comes in, he says, I'd like to test my ads and see whether they work or not. And so then me and all the other people, we go and we're like, all right, well, It'll cost about $80,000, and it would take 6 weeks, but then we'll get you an answer. And then he rolled his eyes and left the room. Muttered some stuff under his breath. And so, basically we've spent, and the industry has spent, the last 8 years really driving down the cost of things. In 2016, it cost about $30,000 to test an ad. We've gotten that down to about $300. And what's exciting about that is that now it's extremely cheap to test stuff. And so for the first time in the history of political strategy, it's actually very straightforward to find out what persuades people and what doesn't. This is just some graphs of our volume, just to give you a sense of the scale. We've done something like 30 million survey interviews since 2021. We've tested tens of thousands of pieces of content. And, it's just very cool, because at that point, when you have 30,000 pieces of content, you can really learn and see patterns about what works and what doesn't. And so here, this is a graph. Every single one of these bars is a message that we tested for one of our clients. And what you could see here is, and I guess I'm really lucky that the screen ends right where my hand is, but like these messages over here are about 5 times better than the average message. And then all the way over there, you see a bunch of messages that again actively make people vote for Republicans, which is bad to me. So kind of a lot of the job of politics is that campaigns are really this massive, decentralized, endeavor where you have thousands of different groups, each of whom, cumulatively employ tens of thousands of people, and they're all constantly saying stuff. Whether it's on TV, whether they're posting things on social media, and the job of a campaign is how do you make sure all of those people say the stuff that's over here and don't say the stuff that's down there in red.
What was the worst one? What was the worst one?
Well, I think it's basically what you would expect. I'll get to that. I swear. All right. So now I'm gonna show you a wall of numbers. This is not appropriately sized, but I'll just walk you through it. So the basic idea is that we're trying to measure for every single issue. We have 40 different issue areas, things like inflation, Medicare, education, whatever. We basically measure how important voters find it, and then we also measure whether or not voters trust Democrats on that particular issue. And the issue landscape for this election, when Democratic strategists are trying to figure out, what to do, is that if you look at the top issues that voters care about right now, it's the cost of living, inflation, the deficit, crime, national security, and these are all terrible issues for Democrats. Partly because of the moment, but really these have always been bad issues for Democrats. The basic dynamic in two-party politics is that center-left parties tend to have an advantage on issues like healthcare or equality, while the right has an advantage on things like fiscal discipline, on crime. People talk kind of about how there's a mommy party and a daddy party, and that's the trust thing is always there. But what people care about really varies a lot. In 2020, for example, Democrats had a really easy strategic position, which was that the two issues that voters cared about the most were COVID and healthcare. And those also happened to be the issues that people trusted Democrats on the most. And so all we really had to do was talk about those two things and ignore the people who were like, hey, let's not have police. And so that was a much easier problem. Now the problem is that the issues that voters care the most about are issues that voters just don't trust Democrats on, while the issues that people do trust Democrats on, you can't see this because it's blocked, but it's like abortion and climate change, basically. Voters don't care about a lot right now. And so the basic strategic mission for Democrats is you have to get people to care more about abortion, and then you also have to get voters to trust Democrats more on crime and the deficit and inflation. So that's the strategic outlook. This is a different graph. This is just showing the difference between what rich Democrats care about and what poor Democrats care about. And this is just kind of a helpful thing to see. At the very top is climate change. I once had breakfast with a CBC member member of the Congressional Black Caucus, and while we were having breakfast, he was just like, what really strikes me is white people are obsessed with climate change. I don't get it. And you really, this just kind of comes through. It's something that rich Democrats care a lot more about. Well, if you look at what poor Democrats care a lot about, it's unemployment, housing, poverty, and I think that's kind of unsurprising. But there's the problem is the people who work, like all of this polling is very important because the people who work in politics on both the Democratic side and the Republican side are all kind of people like me. They live in cities, they're young, they're educated, and so, the stuff that we care about is, not really representative of the stuff that persuadable voters care about. And so, a lot of the challenge in politics is how do you step outside of this bubble that you live in, and, in general, if you want to win, it's better to talk about the stuff at the bottom versus talking about the stuff at the top. So this is just another graph, which is just a series of test results, but it turns out talking about things that are more popular makes you win more. That's an incredibly controversial thing to say in Democratic politics, but it is true. We've done the tests, it turns out. And just we've polled a couple hundred different policies in a consistent format, and one of the things that kind of comes through very clearly is just that voters care the most about concrete issues that affect people's lives. Things like healthcare, things like education. Well, a lot of the things at the bottom, I won't say them out loud, but there are a lot of the things that you would expect. So what this table shows, this is just kind of showing how effective different topics are, and that kind of answers your questions a little bit. And it just turns out that what topics politicians choose to talk about really matters a lot. That's another controversial statement in Democratic politics, but it's true. Where the very best thing, for Democrats to talk about is Social Security and healthcare. That's been true for 40 years, and it continues to be true. Well, to answer the other guy's question, in terms of what's in the bottom, it's, student loans. I hope that doesn't make anyone mad, or talking about January 6th. But, you just kind of see things that concretely affect, the median voter's life. And, it's just important to remember that the median voter is about 50 years old, and so, that's just kind of what works. How you say it matters. So this is from our treatment library, and this is showing our single best message on immigration. What you can see over here is that immigration is close to the bottom. In general, it's a pretty terrible topic for Democrats. But if you talk about it in the right way, the overall average of immigration messages is 25th percentile. But by talking about it in the right way, you can go from 25th to 60th or 70th. And so this immigration message, just kind of talks about common sense solutions, fixing a broken system that incentivizes people to break the law. And the whole return to these kind of testing is to learn how to talk about things in a way that doesn't alienate conservatives or alienate Trump voters. And it turns out that on basically every topic there are ways to do it. And this is just kind of showing over here some good messages at the top and some bad messages at the bottom. I'll just read the top one and then the bottom one, and then you can kind of get a sense for things. The first is Democrats say you should support the Democratic candidate because they support pro-immigration legislation. This is about fixing a broken system. If we don't want migrants crossing the border, we need to work now to reform legal methods of entry by reducing wait times for visas, improving background checks, and staffing our immigration system and courts. That's a pretty reasonable thing that you could say to your uncle, without him yelling at you. And that was a 70th percentile message relative to the kind of things that our clients come up with, which is very good for immigration. Baseline's like 25. The flip side is that our worst immigration message is Democrats say that you should support, Democrats because they support pro-immigration legislation. Immigration detention in the United States is inhumane, abusive, and unjust. Immigrants are entitled to the same basic rights, human rights as everyone else. Biden must prioritize, this one's a little old, Biden must prioritize reducing the number of people behind bars in immigration detention centers across the country. And I personally, my politics, I agree with that sentence. It turns out most swing voters don't. And that's one of the really challenging things, when you do this work, is that as I said before, the people you're trying to persuade and the people you're trying to mobilize are not like you. If they were, they wouldn't be swing voters. The key thing that characterizes swing voters is that they don't have strong party ties and they don't buy into comprehensive ideologies. And so that means that you have to purposely suppress yourself and not say things that you think people won't agree with. And you also have to take frames that just don't come very naturally to you. And so, anyway, that's the end. That's the talk. Since there's a lot of crypto people here, I just thought I would post the Polymarket odds of the election outcomes. And there we go. Thanks. So I think the plan is for me to take questions, but I'm gonna. Yeah. Oh, cool. All right. I'm just gonna.
Let's do one picture.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Yeah.
All right, everyone smile.
Oh.
3, 2, 1, cheese.
All right. I'm just gonna go in order. I guess.
Yeah, so I noticed on one of the slides you had a breakdown of the effect of one of the messages by like age groups and different things like that. I was wondering, how often is it the case that there is this kind of heterogeneity in the message? And if there is heterogeneity in terms of like statistical terms, do you think that that actually reflects like a substantive difference in the way the message is being received? Like how do you differentiate those?
That's a great question. Actually, sometimes I say that's a great question as filler, but no, it's a great question. So, I think a lot of the news coverage of my industry is really focused on micro-targeting. It started with Mark Penn, he was talking about soccer moms, and I think everyone got really into this idea of, let's say, one thing to one person and another thing to another person, and the reality is that politics doesn't work like that, for two reasons. The first reason is that even if you could find the 50 people in Ridgewood for whom defund the police is a good message, like, the Republicans exist, and they will record you saying that to them, and then they will broadcast it out to everybody else. But what we see is, look, there are differences in what persuades people, and it's like very interesting sociologically to study that. Probably the biggest axis, or the biggest two axes, is some things appeal more to liberals, some things appeal more to conservatives, and the other is age. It turns out young people and old people are persuaded by very different things, because they're very different, much like liberals and conservatives. But at the end of the day, campaigns that win by finding broadly persuasive messages that appeal to everyone. And I think that's probably the biggest misconception about my field. Okay, you're next, I guess. Yeah.
Where does crypto fall in the political football right now? Is it left issue, is it right issue?
Yeah, it's interesting. We did a poll of crypto users that I tweeted about maybe admittedly in 2022, so things may have changed since then. But overall, we find that crypto owners are a Democratic-leaning group for the basic reason. At the time, it was something like 61% Biden. And that's in some ways unsurprising for the basic reason that it's a group that's very young, very educated, lives in cities, also disproportionately non-white, which is also part of that. But there's also a dynamic where the more crypto you have, the more Republican you are, and we're all on Twitter, we see that. But I see the crypto space as kind of classically cross-pressure. Because on one hand, they are mad about a variety of regulatory actions and positions that have been taken by folks on the left. But on the other hand, the kind of people who are into crypto should be Democrats. If you just found, in general, if you look at hyper-educated young men and who live in cities, they're a pretty Democratic-leaning group. And so you kind of have these two things kind of going against each other. It's one of the big reasons, and it's one of the big reasons why they're especially persuadable and why you're seeing both sides kind of fight over their votes right now. And then the other thing I'll say about crypto, outside of polling, is I think what's pretty interesting about crypto is there's really only two groups of single issue. There are only two single issue advocacy groups that really exist in politics. One is Israel, and the other is crypto. There are lots of issue advocacy groups that are part of a coalition. Like if you look at the labor unions or Planned Parenthood or the NRA, they're all basically in one way or another appendages of the Democratic or Republican Party. And so as a result, their spending tends to be pretty concentrated in one party or the other. Crypto's one of the only ones that spends on both sides because they genuinely care a lot about crypto. So that's my crypto rant. To you, closest.
How accurate do you think the poly market is? How do you think the bill compares to polls? Yeah.
Well, if you're interested, there's a really good I think Quanta article about this. In general, prediction markets are usually more accurate than polls for the basic reason that polls are an input to them. It's interesting that different betting markets seem to have different levels of accuracy. If you look like Manifold, for example, in 2022 had a higher accuracy rate than Poly Market. Metaculus beat all of them. That's very funny. It's been a long time since I worked in finance, but it's very weird to me that the prices are not the same everywhere, but I know people are working on that.
Relative to their partisanship, what are some politicians that you think are above replacement and some that are below replacement in the pie?
Do you mean, he asked which politicians are above replacement or below replacement. Do you mean that in terms of ability to win elections or policy or how much I like them? Or?
In winning elections and what drives your performance in elections? And I guess how does that relate to your work?
Another great question. So I think one of the single biggest misconceptions about politics is just that, people who, I think people who work in politics and who care a lot about politics tend to have fairly ideologically extreme views, and they want radical policy change. I'm one of those people. That's why I got into politics. But it turns out that actually, it turns out if you look if you look at what politicians are the most popular, like if you just go and look at who are the most popular senators, who are the most popular governors, it turns out that it's usually, people like Joe Manchin, or the actual answer are a bunch of governors you've never heard of. People like Bill Scott, he's a Republican governor in Vermont. Burgum, who was almost the VP, but he's the governor of North Dakota. And you look at them and you're like, I've never heard of these people. They've never done anything. And it turns out voters love that. This is the single biggest misconception about politics, is that swing voters are deeply suspicious of both parties, do not buy into either liberal or conservative ideological superstructures, and generally speaking, do not want anything to happen. Status quo bias is just the biggest thing in politics, and that makes it really hard because both parties are controlled by people who want to do things. But whether or not they stay in power, the people who decide what party controls things don't want things to happen. And so it's funny, this is called thermostatic. It's a terrible name, but in political science, people call this thermostatic public opinion, that basically, when Democrats win elections, the public becomes more conservative, and when Republicans win elections, the public becomes more liberal. This is a pretty robust effect. It's surprisingly large if you look at graphs, and I think it doesn't really feature, you don't hear activists talk about it very much because it's very annoying from the perspective of wanting to change things. All right, another question. There's a ton of questions. All right, I'm gonna go over there and then I'll get to the back.
Correctly, if I'm framing it correctly, I noticed that politicians don't talk about things that go like saying out loud and so after you present your findings, I'm wondering why don't they listen? How are they deciding what to do?
Yeah, so he asked basically, it doesn't seem, when you listen to politicians talk, it doesn't seem like they're talking about the good things, it seems like they're talking about the bad things. Another great question. And, the answer to that is if you actually look at ads made by Democratic campaigns, they tend to be, they're pretty, by this metric, good in that they're boring. They're like, we want to lower healthcare costs for seniors. We're laser focused on the cost of living. Whatever. And that's because when the people who run the Democratic Party have an enormous amount of control over what ads end up being about. But when it comes to what are random people talking about on Twitter, the Democratic Party actually is a coalition of probably like 1,000 different groups, many of which are quite small, all of whom, to be frank, have to do a lot of online fundraising. And it does just kind of turn out that the messages that help you raise the most money are very different than the messages that help you win. And that's just because democracy is a really weird thing. Like in business, if you can get 1% of the public to buy your product, you will become fabulously wealthy, and that's incredible. But in politics, that doesn't get you anywhere. And so there's fundamentally different strategies that get you to 1% or 3% than that get you to 50, and that's just one of the hard challenges in the States. I'm gonna, in the corner.
Do them quickly.
Yeah, okay.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
What are the top 3 messages that the campaign for Harris president should be pushing in the Rust Belt states to get a victory? What are the top 3 messages of the Harris campaign for Rust Belt states?
Cost of living, healthcare, abortion, that's basically, as I said, yeah. And how much more time do we have? Okay. Yeah, sorry. All right. Let's just have a couple people say questions and then I'll synthesize. Let's do that group in the back over there.
Am I right that from the government television perspective, it's way more effective to say that counter messages, not the pro things? Like to say that Republicans have not tried, we're right? Like,
I just can't hear you.
am I right that the government television is way more efficient to say that someone is not right at the moment? Because they get Russia, and then they get the voice there.
It's all good.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. Oh yeah, I think I understand your question. Also, I just want to say, I used to live in Russia, and when I told them about my research in election forecasting, nobody was impressed. It turns out. So he's in some ways kind of asking about positive messaging versus negative messaging, and just whether it makes more sense to boost yourself versus attack your opponent. And what I'll say about that is that positive messaging almost always does better. There are exceptions. It's a very funny thing. Like, you go to the donor meetings, and you would really think, like, I think a lot of leftists have incorrect models of what happens in these things. They think it's like, there's some rich donor, he has a monocle, and he's like, I'm going to take my money out unless you legalize coal. But actually, rich donors, just like, are rich people who watch a lot of MSNBC. And so then they come in, and then they get mad, and they're like, oh, you're letting the Republicans walk all over us. We need to punch them in the face. And then you go, negative advertising. I've not thought of that. We'll get right on that. We'll give it a shot. But the basic problem is that, as I said before, swing voters like Democrats less and also hate Republicans less than I do. And so it just ends up not really working. The median swing voter already has a negative view of the Republican Party, but also a negative view of the Democratic Party. If swing voters were in a place to absorb our criticisms of the other side, they would not be swing voters. They would be Democrats.
White one still like
All right, no, next question.
Next question. All right, over there.
How much does the party actually listen? Like, how much is your research like ground truth versus we'll kind of think about it?
50-50. The reality is, I think there's a mix of sometimes there's a lot of coalition politics that prevents people from saying the most active, the most effective thing. But then the flip side is if you don't listen to the coalition politics, then they start shitting on you. And so, there are real constraints. Politics is hard.
All right, thanks. Go.
What was the most surprising thing just uncovering?
Okay, probably the most surprising thing, because a lot of the stuff I've been saying is like, defund the police is bad, healthcare is good. Electric cars are really bad. Like, if I had a choice between a Democrat embracing defund the police or electric cars, it would be pretty close. Voters really hate electric cars. I don't drive. I don't know. So, Kamala Harris, you know. I don't want to get in trouble. You know, I mean, I have boring answers to this. I'm a big Gretchen Whitmer fan. You know, I like Josh Shapiro. Pete Buttigieg is great. I don't know. I think people who want to ask questions should probably just like come to the front because it's hard for me to.
What's your number one trick to get a fun here?
Tweet a lot. I think is the answer. You know, the honest answer is I don't know. My best guess is that it's pretty close. There are like I've met Republican versions of me. They exist. You know, the other side has a lot of money too. You know. No, I meant, so he asked, are LLMs being used in politics? The answer is yes, by both sides. Yeah. The really big thing is that old people used to be silent generation, and now they're boomers. And boomers are just a lot more liberal than silent. And so, you know, Democrats do a lot better with old people than they used to, and they're doing worse with young people. So it's a very interesting time, you know.
You just mentioned there is Republican versions of you, there is LLMs being used. So how do you see this young kind of evolving in that landscape of especially farm race using technology?
It is fun to be involved. He's asking how I think this space will evolve. It is fun being in a zero-sum game. You know, it's very sobering. I think many of us are in zero-sum games. I assume LLMs are going to take over everything, but that's the direction I'm going. I hope so. Okay, I'm going to give an answer to this though, and I'm sorry. So, you know, I think a lot of people in politics, a lot of people see like this space as like kind of fundamentally illegitimate. You know, they're like, oh, you're just manipulating people, you're radicalizing people. And you know what I'll say after having been a pollster for a while is that every time we've ever done a test, it has said you should be more moderate, you should be less divisive, you should be more positive. I think that a lot of the negativity that exists in our system kind of is because both parties are dominated by highly ideological people who are young and, you know, and hate each other. And I think that, you know, in our political process, when you just kind of look, you know, educated people are more likely to run for office, they're more likely to donate, they're more likely to vote. And so at every single step, the views of educated people are overweighted, except election day. And polling is basically the only chance that, you know, regular people get a chance to say what they think. I'm going to do one more question and then...
Distill the mobilization aspect. Talking about fundraising, but like how to get people to actually work for you or you on the streets and how that conflicts with the.
Yeah, you know, there's another misconception in politics. You know, like people like to divide things into persuasion and mobilization, where they're like, you know, we have the swing voters, like the fat people in Ohio with the lunch pails, and then we have the base, which they imagine as like, I don't know, like super liberal young kids in college campuses. But the reality is, you know, your persuasion targets are people who you're pretty sure are going to vote, but have a 50-50 chance of voting for you. And your get out the vote targets are people who would probably vote for you if they voted, but you're not sure if they're going to turn out or not. And that group, it turns out, is overwhelmingly working class, overwhelmingly non-white, overwhelmingly young. But the important thing is overwhelmingly moderate. Like if you look at Democratic persuasion targets, like the list that Joe Biden is going to, Kamala Harris is going to use to figure out who to knock on their doors. 60% of those people identify as moderate. Only 20% of them identify as liberal. And so it turns out that, you know, the same messages that kind of get moderate people, you know, like swing voters to vote for you, are generally the ones that get these kind of, you know, young working class people of color to support you as well. There are some trade-offs, but I think it's less than you'd think. All right, I guess one more. You walk up. our best, but it's hard. But yeah, I think the policy polling project that we did was this kind of cool idea of after the 2020 election, we got all the major stakeholders, people like Joe Manchin, Squad, all the different groups, they all submitted policies, and we tested them in a standardized way just so that folks could make these optimization problems. And it's been an interesting ride. That's like what I'm trying to do is influence policy, but it turns out politics is hard and complicated. So TBD. All right, that's all the questions. Thank you so much. I'm gonna be hanging out here.
Thank you guys for coming out. Enjoy the rest. Thank you to Sugar Mouse as well. Do you want to come up and say anything? Thank you to Williamsburg Pizza. Thank you to all for coming. We'll hope to see you for Brian Johnson on August 19th. Until then, bye.
You too.